So the panel is the future of open source cloud computing. So it's we were trying to get a few things out of this confusion, and I couldn't resist for the panelists. They can actually watch this on their screen here. As a chairman of that panel, I couldn't resist putting up that slide, which again expressed the very vividly, I should say, the opinion of RMS, one of the, of course, visionary of open source. His opinion on cloud computing. The first mention of cloud computing he stated was in an interview to The Guardian, the British newspaper, and he said that the concept of using web-based programs is worse than stupidity, referring to the use of cloud computing in any organization. And then he, again, much earlier this year, last July, last summer, he kind of toned down that statement in the typical Stallman style and just says that internet users need to swim against the stream if they want to protect their privacy. And by the way, this picture was, he was visiting France about 10 days ago. He was at the invitation of none other than the government to talk in a panel himself about open data and all the open government open data initiatives that you are seeing in the US, in the UK, and that the state is, the government is trying to establish also in France. And he's here in typical Stallman's mode. He looks petrified by the cold of the, because it was very early morning and the temperature was really freezing in the room. And he's next to Augustin Landier, which is one of our brightest economists of the Toulouse School of Economists, which was explaining exactly the contrary of what Stallman was again explaining about the advantage and the importance of things being kept open. So with this as an introduction, showing that the issue of cloud computing and open source is not that clear, maybe we should open the panel by asking you know, each panelist to maybe state his or her position about that statement by the open source visionary, and maybe switch that or put what he's involved in into that context, so that we understand a bit better what open source can bring to cloud computing, or whether the two are related, or even if they are not related. Maybe Jean-Pierre, you would start.
Thanks for the gift. So, is RMS right or wrong? I won't. Apparently, at the same time, he agreed with Mr. Edison from Oracle, so I won't argue on that. What's for sure is there is a kind of, as he has been said before, there's a kind of competition between free software and cloud services. I mean, software delivered as a service is not the same as software as delivered. So it's competing in the distribution mode. Okay, so the fact that you can have access to a software without having to install it or manage it or whatever is something that the cloud can bring. But on the other side, when you do that, you lose another quality, which is control on that. So Stallman and FSF tried to solve that with a license, saying that the service can be free if, for instance, the software that delivers the service is AGPL, Affero General Public License. But in that case, this is not good enough to have the same quality, I mean, that you can find in free software. There are some good approach about the fact that these services should be delivered in a kind of loyalty. I mean, that means that, okay, these services can be AGPL or whatever, but plus the contract with the consumer of the service should be clear, making sure that everybody will have access to the generated data and some kind of reversibility, the fact that the service can be interoperable and things like that. So even if it looks simpler to have access to software through cloud services, from the consumer perspective, it can be a little more complicated or complex to have a real fair contract with the service provider. So I think Stallman in that way is not totally out of reality. And when you speak about privacy, access to data, control of data, and things like that. So we have some tension here. The good news is that everybody in cloud computing industry is working on that. I mean, they have in mind that open source is beneficial to their business, and they will work on the fact that it has to be beneficial to the consumer. So I think we will solve that.
All right. So maybe we could ask, OpenNebula on the one hand and Microsoft on the other, their reaction to that, because I understand that. From the position, which is a bit polemical as usual with Stallman's, and the beginning of an answer that we're getting from OW2 here, what can be imported from the open source principles, basically because this is what we're talking about, not necessarily of the open source code itself, because this branches down into why GPL 3.0 is different from GPL 2.0, because it takes into account software as a services, which is a major difficulty that GPL didn't anticipate. What would be your definition of an open cloud, basically? What can we import from the open source principles that Stallman's identified in the Free Software Foundation and all his work since then? And what is relevant to the cloud? And should we look at opening the code, opening the processes, opening the, as Jean-Pierre suggested, the economics of the relation between the provider and the users? So in that case, the licensing models would be what would be exported from the open source to the cloud computing communities. What would be your definition of an open cloud?
Well, I can give you my opinion from the perspective of the OpenNebula project. As you know, open source technology to build infrastructure service clouds. So it's more about enabling the cloud. From a perspective, when we talk about open cloud, it's about open standards, open specifications, and open source. And the benefits provided by this open cloud for me are clear. For example, I think that open source, thanks to open source, cloud computing can be a powerful platform for innovation, because it's the best way to have or to receive contributions from different projects and organizations, and also to have a very fast release cycle to bring those innovations to users as soon as possible. It's also a powerful tool for differentiation, because users can adapt, for example, the interfaces in order to address a given market. And also we think that it's very important for integration. And we think that cloud is an evolution of the data center, and experience is that users want to build cloud using their existing infrastructure, the existing hardware, software, and services. So they need something that can be adapted to fit into their data centers. So we think open source is very important from the perspective of building the cloud, for innovation, for differentiation, for integration.
But that's important for the provider of those services. How is it important to the user of those services?
I think that from the perspective of the user, the critical point is the interoperability. It's more to provide open standards than to provide, a cloud that is built using open source. So,
maybe you want to comment on that?
Yes. Coming back to your first question, first of all, I would like to be very clear on Richard Stallman. I don't think he has any vision on anything.
Well, from the picture, you could actually argue that he's asleep, right? Really. But,
he uses the word stupidity. I won't. And you will hear from now on, from myself, probably say very good things about open source. I will start immediately, but that has nothing to do with what he thinks about those things. So let's come back to your second question. First of all, I do agree with Ignacio, and he knows what he talks about very much. Open cloud is something in which, from the user point of view, you should be able to run anything you may want to use in terms of technology. Whether it's a commercial technology, whether it's an open source one, anything you want for the best cost and with the best flexibility as you defined it previously. Second dimension, and I will end up with the open standards. The second dimension is the necessity for you, the ability to choose different providers. So Day one, you have a very good offering from one vendor, and day two, because the other vendor is in a better position, you want to be able to change that seamlessly, at least at the least cost possible. And that makes it, this is only made possible thanks to open standards. So we all should be able to rely on those standards. So there are lots of works across the globe today on that, whether it's in the normalization space, whether it's in the relationship between vendors. So that, for me, is about open cloud.
Yeah,
which
more
is
precisely, there is
angle.
the open source cloud initiative that started this summer. So maybe we could extend some comment on this.
Yeah, just one last comment, which is different from open source. I don't think that just by putting the word open in front of anything, then you rely on the same philosophy or on the same approach.
Okay.
We all should be very cautious in the fact that using open might mean something.
In one
we
sense,
always
and
need to
something
redefine
different in
it.
another. Okay, very interesting. Maybe you should, you want to comment on the, we all read about the open source cloud initiative.
The Open Cloud Initiative.
The Open Cloud Initiative, I'm sorry. Trying to foster open standards, towards higher interoperability of clouds. And this, again, comparing to the idea that if you choose an architecture for basically developing an open cloud or moving your application processes and programs and data to the to a cloud computing, what is the probability that you're going to change provider once you have all that data that is proprietary or that is very valuable, or all those processes that took years to refine running on a cloud computing architecture provided by your preferred provider, whoever it is.
So the first mission that the Open Cloud Initiative had was to define what is it to be open in the cloud. And I think everybody here has agreed already on the three principles about standards, adhering to open source, etc., etc. However, on standard, there is one thing that we have to realize. The notion of standard as we generally accept it do not apply yet to cloud computing. We are 5 years away to be on a common agreed set of standards for cloud computing. So when we looked at that, we went into a much narrower definition of standard, which is something that is implemented in multiple places and at least as one reference implementation that is open source. From this point, the Open Cloud Initiative has decided to very soon start labelizing solutions as being open cloud compatible. This acceptance criteria are clearly defined on the Open Cloud Initiative form and makes it very clear. If you do not have open formats, open standards, an implementation, at least one reference implementation that is open source, you're not open cloud. And why is that important? Because you need, as a user, to know whether or not you'll be locked in into a given provider. When coming back to what Richard Stallman was saying, I think that he was speaking from a very narrow definition of cloud.
I think so.
He was talking about the use by end users of platforms such as Facebook. He was not talking about cloud computing as widely as we are talking about today, from infrastructure as a service to software as a service, including PaaS.